Welcome to the Starter Girlz podcast, the show dedicated to the Starter Girl. She's an achiever, she's a creator, she's a magic maker, she's a dreamer, and she is doing all the things. I'm your host, Jennifer Loading, and welcome to this episode. All right, so welcome to another episode of the Starter Girlz podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Loading. I'm so excited about my guest today. I think she's going to bring a wealth of knowledge to you guys, so it's gonna be good. So she says that after learning that her father took his own life 35 years after he died, she had to re-grieve his death for the second time. She needed to process this new kind of loss and come to terms with the fact that he had had a mental illness and was suffering in silence. So she turned her pain into purpose by working as a crisis counselor and mental health advocate. She says her goal is to share content and spark conversation to help end the stigma of suicide, one story at a time. She's an author, a nationally syndicated columnist, a 3-time survivor of suicide loss, a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project. She's also a storyteller with the National Alliance on Mental Illness and a mental health advocate. So Lisa Sugarman, welcome to the Starter Girlz. We're so excited to chat with you today.
Oh, thanks, Jen. I'm excited to be here.
This is going to be great. So, all right. So one of the things about Starter Girlz, I always like to talk about, we're bringing content to this show. We're trying to help make women that are in leadership positions, whether they're entrepreneurs or a leader in their company, leader of their home, whatever that is, to be the most effective in all the areas of their life. And I know that personally, even in our house, I've talked about, mental health is a big thing, right? It is a big thing. And we personally, I haven't shared it, openly in podcasts, but I've talked about it in different areas of my life that we struggled with some of it in our own home. So I know the value of the and importance of it, but also for so long, the stigma that was wrapped around it. So I'm really excited to chat with you and hear your insight on this, but I want to open up really quick for you to give us a little bit of background into your story. You don't have to go into, major details, but just lead us up to this, how you got into this.
Yeah, sure. So I've always been a content creator in one way or another. Early in my career, I was a newspaper reporter, I wrote for magazines. I did a lot of marketing and PR, like lots of different kind of content creation. And I kind of found my niche in the parenting space for about, I would say 10 or 12 years, wrote a bunch of parenting books, was very active on lots of the bigger parenting sites like Today Show Parenting and Healthline Parenthood and Grown and Flown. And as you said, about 10 years ago, I had a revelation, a learning, a knowing that my father had actually taken his life. And this was something I learned 35 years after his death. So it really it gutted me completely and in every way. And it really kind of shut me down for a period of time. I was kind of going through the motions in life, doing what I needed to do as a mom and doing my job and those types of important day-to-day things. But on the inside, it just kind of shattered me. And it was during that whole kind of rebuilding and processing and just trying to kind of make sense of it all, if there's even a way to do that, I kind of found my way to mental health advocacy. I found my way to storytelling. I've always kind of told stories in the columns that I write and the books that I write anyway. So it wasn't like that was a very hard stretch. And I just kind of started putting all of my attention in that mental health bucket, trying to both understand kind of that suicidal mentality and that mental illness mentality, and also trying to bust apart the stigma of it all. Because like you said, it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what your beliefs are, you're going to be touched by it in some way. And right now, even though the stigma has changed for the better, it's not quite as taboo as it used to be. It's still there. And we need to do an awful lot more work. So I've kind of rededicated my life and my work to changing that whole narrative on what it means to be mentally ill and what it means when someone takes their life and everything that kind of goes together with that. So that's what I'm putting out into the world now.
Yeah. And it's a lot. And I think that when you talk about mental health, we talk about the stigma. You're right. It has come a long way, but I feel like it's like when we found out my daughter needed to do gluten-free, it was like at the time we found this out, it was kind of nobody knew what gluten-free was.
Yeah.
And then now you go everywhere and it's on the menu, it's everywhere. Right. And I feel like that's sort of kind of the way mental health is talked about for so long. It was sort of this, was it even a thing? Nobody talked about it, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody brought it up. And then now it's it goes both ways. I mean, I think we need to address it. It needs to be something that needs to be open, and it needs to be a place where people feel safe when they
Mm.
have these conversations. If they know they're struggling, they know where to go, and we need to talk about it more.
Yeah. 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 Because when we don't talk about it is when that toxicity kind of creeps back in, and when it isn't mainstream in the way that you would talk about cancer, or the way you would talk about someone who was it was injured, it's like it makes it something completely different and unique, and something that people feel super uncomfortable talking about in a way that you would just never talk about. um, you would never talk about someone having a heart attack in the same way that you would talk about someone taking their life, because there's no tabooness around it. But
Right.
it still exists with mental illness and depression and anxiety, and even though people are getting a little freer with it, it's not nearly where it needs to be.
Why do, and what is your take on that? Like why we feel it's such a taboo thing? Because I feel like I have my take. I think it's we're taught for so long that it we look weak, right? Like if we don't have it
Mm,
all together, it's this
yeah.
whole message of. I'd love to know like what your takeaway is on that.
I think I think it's part of that. I think it's the optics. I think that's exactly what it is. I think that in the world that we live in, and in particular in the country that we live in, there's just
Mm,
this perception that we've got to constantly just keep soldiering on and keep pushing forward and just sucking it up and dealing with it and toughen up. And it's this mentality that's just kind of permeated our culture, and it's made it impossible for people to not feel shamed when they say, I
mm,
need to take a day off of work because my mental health is not great, or I need to help a family member because their mental health is not great, or
right.
we in any way disclose the fact that we might not be okay. Like, it's never been okay in this country in particular to not be okay. And so, yeah, you're right. There's a complete weakness aspect to all of that. And, it's like the people who go into work, and I used to be guilty of this. I was totally guilty of this, like going into work not feeling well, because, we're all kind of playing the martyr in some way of, well, I have to show that I can handle it. I have to show that I'm tough enough.
Right.
I have to show that I'm not weak. And all that does is create this culture that frowns upon being mentally not okay. And that's crushing people, because it's this idea, well, if you don't show up today, even though we have all these things like, mental health days and sick days and whatnot, well, somebody else is standing in line waiting to do your job, who's not going to call out sick, or who's not going to complain. So I think there's this perception, and there's this perception too, among children and within families. Like, parents don't like the way the optics look if their child
Mm,
is dealing with a mental illness, because maybe that's a reflection, or they think that's a reflection on their parenting, which of course it's not at all a reflection on someone's parenting.
right. Yeah.
It's interesting to me just to see how people interpret mental illness, and why they think it's such a negative, where you would never say that about any other kind of an illness.
It's so interesting too because I feel like this is a conversation like I had this with my kids at different times because we've dealt with it in our house, and I've always been of the mindset that I don't really care how it makes me look. I just want my kids healthy. Like
Yeah.
I want my kids living their best life and being
Yep.
at optimal. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but being able to work optimally, right, be
Hmm.
effective and be able to be happy and all those things. And I
Yeah.
recognize that, you made this point about in there about how the optics, with parents, and so often they get hung up on this idea that it's a reflection of them. And bad things happen to good people all the time. And,
Hmm.
sometimes, yes, there are certain things that our parenting does reflect off on, or maybe habits or behaviors. We do know that things, we were taught as young, they carry over into our life later on,
Oh
and we have to
yeah.
work through
Yeah.
that. But I do think we have to release our ego, right? If we want as a parent, if we want what's best for our children to thrive,
Hmm.
remove that and say it's really about how do I help the child, And so
Right.
there's so much to that.
Yeah,
I
there's
have,
then we could do a whole conversation
I
just
know.
about that. But I
Yes.
mean, Yeah, it's true. It's unfortunate because the only ones who are really suffering in that case
Yeah.
are the children or are the people who are dealing with the mental illness because it just needs to be cared for and acknowledged and treated and respected the same way that you would any other kind of an illness, and it's still getting really skewed, and that's the thing that we need to change. So that's what I'm out here trying to do.
Yeah. And you do this through your writing, the storytelling, and
Mm,
then all of the other work that you do as well. So good.
yeah, trying.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. I
Mm,
admire you for that because I do think I think it's probably most of what happens in our lives on a day to day. I think that a lot of, I don't like to make light of illnesses, like, I'm talking physical, other illnesses, but I think
mm,
there's a lot of mental stuff that's manifested in these things as well, and I've
yeah.
talked about that in health. When I was talking to somebody on a previous show, she was talking about something she had gone through and she had taken up exercise, bodybuilding, particularly to help her get through. She had been, had a home invasion and was sexually
Oh,
assaulted and was
okay.
going through the traumatic, all the stuff that comes in the aftermath of that. And she said she took up exercising during that time and then became a bodybuilder. And she said she
Mm,
didn't know what she would have done had she had not had done something to get through that. Right. And
mm.
so, yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to get through, and you got to find ways, and there has to be more talk around it, because I think that if we get into this mindset that we're not dealing with it, then we're sort of compartmentalizing and saying, I don't have this problem, when we really
Mm.
do. And it can manifest into so many different ways. It can plague our health, our well-being, all the
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah,
So
that's one of the things that is the hardest is when people try to just kind of tamp it all down and try
mhm.
to just, lock it away. And the thing about that is, I mean, look, you know what happens to a radiator if you don't bleed it. The old fashioned radiator, it's just going to blow up
Right,
and it's
right.
going to be catastrophic. And, kind of like our system is designed the same way, like our physical system, our mental scaffolding in there is created the same way, that it's going to fall apart if we don't let what's in there out. And at the same time, we have to be willing to be vulnerable, because if people aren't letting the world know what's going on the inside, they can't get help from the outside. And there's a whole world out there with resources and support and people in places that are available. But if you're not acknowledging that you need those things, well, then you're going to be stuck in the same spot because no one's going to be aware of it. So,
Yeah,
you
it
know,
sounds like it's a vicious cycle, or it can be.
it can be. Yeah, it definitely can be.
Yeah, I remember when my daughter was going through some stuff, we had to pull her out of school. And I remember it was so hard actually navigating the school. She was still in high school, and
Mm,
it was so difficult at the time navigating that, because she was in a different placement where she was reporting into a different facility, and they were supposed to be getting her work and giving her credit for being in class, but it was so
mm,
hard to get the two different, the organization and the district, to work together at the time. And I remember
mm.
being just so frustrated, because it was like, have y'all never dealt with this before? Like, have you never had a kid that went through depression? Like, you don't know how to deal with this? I mean, just
Yeah.
it was such a crazy time. And I remember going back to what we said a few minutes ago, the only thing that kept going through my mind is, I just want I want my daughter healthy and well and
Hmm.
thriving. How do we make this work? Like, how do we get to a common ground where the interest here is the child? It is, let's get the
Hmm.
kid, help the kid get what she needs to
Yeah.
get done, and quit making all these other things so hard,
Mm.
So I feel like you have your work cut out for you, because it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who are just resistant to it because it isn't what they're used to. It isn't where they feel comfortable. I think it's hard to be vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
scary. It's very uncomfortable, and people aren't really sure how they're going to be received when they're really open and honest, because a lot of people just don't want to hear that someone's not okay. Because it makes them uncomfortable and it makes them feel funny about what they may not be okay with. And also, too, they don't know how to react to it. They don't know how to
Yeah.
respond. They don't know what to do. So I think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen with us as human beings, just around the concept of vulnerability and what it means to share, and how much do we share, and how do we do it. And then people need to be taught how to receive it, how to hold that space. And it's really not that hard to learn how to hold space for someone. It's really just a matter of listening. You're not there to necessarily solve somebody's problem or fix whatever it is that's wrong. You might just be there just to listen, just to take it all in, just to validate what that person's going through. Or maybe you can offer them some direction, some resources, or some other kind of support. But it's not as hard as people think it is. And when I think people can connect with that, I think that's when things will start to change even more.
Entrepreneurs, are you ready to level up your leadership skills? Tune in now for an exclusive offer designed just for you.
This is my time.
Did you know 63% of consumers prefer businesses aligned with their values? Recognizing your core values isn't just vital for business growth, it's the bedrock of effective leadership. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or an aspiring creator, identifying your core values is a key step in constructing the framework of a successful leader, enabling you to lead authentically, expand your business, and live life on your terms.
I never settled on play, putting the kettle to flame. I go 100 all day, foot on the pedal, no brakes. 10, 9, paid all my dues, waited in line, 8, 7.
Are you ready to access tools to kickstart your leadership journey? Unlock a treasure trove of insights and get your free resources at www.linktree/Jennifer Loading. Take that crucial first step toward realizing your leadership aspirations and elevate your leadership game today.
Ready to shine, brighter than all of the
This is so good you brought that up, because I saw a post. I follow the holistic psychologist. I love her work just because she puts a lot of, I think, real raw stuff out there. And she put something up the other day about Theo Vaughn. I don't know if you know who he is. He's like a comedian. He's hilarious, but he was talking to a UFC fighter and he was interviewing him. He has a podcast and it's a crazy show. It's nothing like what we're doing here. But the UFC fighter was talking, I don't even remember which fighter it was, but he was talking about some past trauma. He was actually crying on the episode. And Theo just basically sat there and was like, just held space, didn't say a word, just let him have his moment. And the holistic psychologist had actually praised him for holding space. And you are so right. That is so hard, I think, for a lot of people to just be quiet. Just don't need to fix it. They sometimes don't want to, they need a moment to get it out. And that's all it is a release, right? Like they just need the pause. And so thank you for bringing that up, because I think that is such a hard thing for so many people to be okay with.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. I mean, we feel almost compelled to have to somehow direct the conversation or how to interject in a way that we don't hijack a conversation. I know that for me in particular, all the training that I went through as a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project really kind of completely reformed the way that I personally hold space for people, not only people who call me on the Lifeline, but people in my own life, my family, my friends, people kind of in my own community. And it really taught me how to just put the person I'm listening to's agency first, like what they need, what they want. It's not about me. We're also inclined to say things like, oh yeah, I know. I mean, like that totally happened to me. I get it. Here's my experience. And while that can be valuable in certain situations, it absolutely can be. Most often when someone is sharing something that's really that either traumatic or challenging for them, they just want to get it out of their head. They just want to get it off their chest. And they don't necessarily want or even need a response. They just want someone there to listen. And so I do so much of that day to day. And it really isn't as hard as people make it out to be.
I think it's so good too, that right there, because just that part you talked about right there, because I always feel like, and this is actually something I learned in my coaching, is how to, do active listening, but also anytime I think that, let me say this, I think as humans, you said this in a way that I feel like we try to empathize with somebody. And the way we do that a lot of times is by saying, oh, I know what you mean. I've been, but listen, all of our experiences are relative to us. Our pain, we feel it. And I've learned that through coaching, and I will say this to my clients a lot. I will always say, I'm not going to pretend to say I know how you feel, because I don't know how you feel. What may be painful to you may not be near as painful for me, right?
Exactly.
So I'm never going to assume that I know how you feel. I might say that, oh, I can feel the pain. Like or I can feel that this is hard for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or this hurts and I can feel it. Like I get chills, like I can feel it, but I don't know what you're going through. And I always like to be abundantly clear about that, because I think when we come from that, and I think this is good in all areas of our life, not just in grief, but even when we're working with clients, our children, everybody, when we come from a place of where we try to put ourselves in their shoe, we almost invalidate their feelings. We almost give them a reason now to say, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be upset about this that I'm upset about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we just hold the space and we sit back and we just go, let them have, this is what they're going through. And it's hard, right?
Yeah.
But it for them is so powerful.
Can be. Yeah, it certainly can be.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I think,
of course.
I think that lesson is so important in all areas of our life. It's not just about going through a moment where somebody's having grief or crisis. I think it's anytime somebody even has a frustration that's important, because when we come back to dealing with human beings as a whole, when we start pretending to say, and it drives me nuts, I'll see this even on people when they post, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And I know they're trying to find commonality, as I like to say, but you don't know what they mean because you're not walking in their shoes.
Right. You know, I talk about that. I used to talk about this a lot when I was talking more in the parenting space about how impactful it is. You just think, I mean, I know you're a mom, you have kids. I'm a mom. I have 2 daughters. And one of the most important lessons that I learned as a parent, and I wished I had learned it earlier, was just to shut the hell up and listen to my kids, because I was always, we're parents, and I don't want to say it's just a mom thing or it's just a dad thing. It's a parent or a caregiver thing to want to be there to help, to support, to listen, to guide, to fix the stuff that's broken, whatever that might be.
Protect
and so our
them from having to go through hard things.
right. So our inclination is to be like, you're cutting your kid off mid-sentence and you're trying to solve the problem or figure out the situation. And one of the things that I started to do, again, later than I wished I had, was say, like, how can I help you? What do you need from me? What's going on with you? How can I help you? What do you need to say? And when I did that in those moments, those were the moments when my girls would open up to me more than any other moment, because they knew I was just there to literally hold that space for them and let them say what they needed to say. So I think you're right. In life, we don't shut up and listen often enough.
Yeah. We need to just be like, my husband does that to me sometimes. He's like this. I'm like, maybe we all should just be walking around and doing this.
Yeah. I don't disagree.
It's a reminder.
Yeah.
Just shut up. Don't talk.
Yeah.
Just listen and don't talk. Right. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because we always want to fix it. And it is. And I'm not going to say I'm not the perfect mom. I haven't always been the perfect mom. I'm getting better at learning to listen to them and let them have their space. And, you know, when sometimes, they're freaking out and I just want to be like, can we just calm down for a moment?
Sometimes they just need to freak out.
You're right. We just got to let the freaking out happen sometimes.
That's right. Yeah.
It's good. Yeah. I love this. So all this to say, we're talking about, I want to jump into this really quick, talking about storytelling and why this is important. And maybe for somebody who is in the business space, I don't know whether, she's an entrepreneur or maybe she's coming from corporate and she's looking to move into a space, this importance, I think, of storytelling, because I think it also goes back to this whole authenticity thing, right? Which is so hard for a lot of us to be vulnerable and to share. But one of the things I bring to this is I used to, in my background with Mary Kay, 22 years in there, we used to always talk about nothing happens until somebody sells something. But then we also knew that nobody cared what you sell till they knew why you did what you did. And so we were always really big on storytelling. So maybe we could, share a little bit of your thoughts on that aspect of it. You mentioned authenticity, but maybe if you have a little more you want to add in that, totally open to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes hand in hand with being vulnerable. It's allowing ourselves to be authentic, and I think one of the big barriers I think people have in sharing their stories is that they're afraid that they're not going to relate with anyone. We're always so isolated in our own heads, mental illness in particular, parenthood in particular, marriage in particular. Those are just off the top of my head, big areas where I know that because I've been all of those things, and I've had moments where I'm overwhelmed either as a mom or as a professional or just with mental health in general. And you're like, nobody feels this way. It's crazy that I feel this way. No one's going to understand. No one's going to be able to relate. I'm going to look ridiculous. And it's only in those moments where we push past that boundary and that place of fear, and we do share our background or our lived experience, because we've all got a story and we've all got lived experience. We may not all have, a story about suicide loss, or we may not all have a story about caring for someone with mental illness, but we all have our own stories and experiences in life. And while they're certainly not all the same, they have similar aspects and they have connection points. And that's the reason why we share a story. Because let's say I share my survivor story with a group of people, and I don't know where those people are kind of on that continuum of loss. Maybe someone just lost someone. Maybe someone's years out from having lost someone. Maybe someone shares their story. Maybe someone doesn't. But when I share mine, maybe there's just one small aspect of how I navigated it, or some of the things that I did for myself in terms of self-care, or how I channeled my feelings into volunteer work or advocacy work, or whatever it may be. That story, that one story, has the capacity to resonate with us in some small way. And when that happens, that's when my story has an impact on you or whoever else is listening. And they take that and they incorporate that into their life and into their habits and into their routine and their thinking. And maybe it changes something for them. Maybe it shifts something in a positive way, or helps them cope with something more effectively, or gives them an idea that they never even thought of. So you just never know how your experience and story is going to affect somebody else. And to withhold that from the world, I think, is doing everybody around you a real disservice, because we can't gauge how our experiences are going to land on someone,
Right.
and what they may do for someone. So I think it's one of the most powerful tools we have kind of in our pocket, and it's one of the oldest tools we all have. I mean, it's before we ever had TV or internet or any of the technology that we have now to be able to communicate with each other. We sat around and we told people stories, and that was how we made an impact. So, I mean, I do it now as often as I possibly can, just as a way of number one, normalizing how important it is to do that, and number two, for whatever value somebody may find in it. And that's why I think we should all be doing the same.
I love it. Well, Lisa, I think what you're doing is great. And I think, again, I say it every time I have stories like this, that it's unfortunate that we have to go through the things that we do. But I think the blessing is when you come on the other side and you can find a way to turn the pain into something that can help other people. And that's what you're doing here. Your ability to take this and move into a space where now you can say, here's some things that I've gone through, and now how I can help somebody else that maybe is navigating some of those similar things. And I think that's the beauty in all of this, is when you're able to do that. So.
Yeah, well, I think myself, I can't speak for anybody else, but I feel like I have an obligation to do that. Like I had something very big and very traumatic happen in my life, and to continue on in my life and not take whatever I've learned from that or understood from that and give it away in the hopes that it can somehow benefit someone else. Like, I feel like that's my responsibility, and that's kind of that's my why. And obviously, to make sure that, my father's suicide was not in vain, just to make something purposeful from it.
I love it. I love it, Lisa. I love what you're doing.
Thanks.
So
I appreciate that.
So you've got a lot of resources. We talked a little bit about this off camera. So I'd love you to share, for you to share a little bit about that, because there may be somebody that listens to this and maybe they know somebody, they're in a particular situation where they would like to get some more information.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I've worked super hard on in the past probably 6 months or so, is just completely redesigning my website to be that hub or that destination, whatever you want to call it, for mental health resources and support and content and videos and guidance. And one of the big pillars of the website has become this mental health resources page that I have, that I spent a lot of time curating, because I wanted it to be something very, very different than what you would kind of find on your typical mental health website. You'd find like your top, call 988 or call the crisis, call the crisis hotline or the crisis text line of the Trevor Project or Samaritans, which of course are absolutely all of the places you should be calling. But there are also very specific needs that very specific communities have. And they need organizations who can cater to those needs, like the BIPOC community and the Asian community and the Latinx community and the LGBTQ community and the parent community. So I wanted to take the idea of kind of a big catch-all mental health resource page and break it down by what I believe to be some of the, the bigger communities out there. So I broke it all down into 16 different categories. So now if you're a veteran and you're looking for mental health resources, you can go to my resource page and click on veterans resources. Or if you're in Canada, click on that link, click on European resources, or I have a link on there that also gives you, I think at this point, it's about 110 out of the 195 different countries around the world and what the equivalent of their 988 suicide hotline numbers are and emergency numbers are. So I have all this information broken down by category, and that's where people can find hopefully the help and the services that they need. And it's all right there on my website at lisasugarman.com. You can bookmark it, you can share it. That's my goal, is to have as many people have it in their pocket as possible.
Very good. We'll make sure to, Lisa, when this goes out, we'll make sure you get tagged or whatever, so people know how to connect with you and reach out.
Oh, that's great.
And of course, to our audience, if you need resources, like I said, if you know someone or you feel like you're in a position where you need some help, please feel free to check out Lisa's work and her resource page. And so, Lisa, thank you so much for jumping on here and talking about a very important topic. I feel like this is an important topic, and sharing your wisdom and knowledge, and we appreciate you.
I am so happy to be here. And if it's okay with you, I just wanted to add one tiny thing at the end here.
Sure.
Obviously, my resource page is something that everybody can use and can source whenever they need it. But if someone's in crisis right now, if they're struggling or somebody who's struggling, call the 988 Crisis Lifeline number. It's a number you can call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Someone will always be there to listen and to give you support. So that's just something that everybody should kind of have on their brains to use when they need it.
Thank you for sharing that, by the way. Appreciate you.
Of course.
All right, you guys. Back. Yep. And as always, you guys take care, be safe, be kind to one another, and we will see you next time.